My father talks a lot about his career in the civil service. I could actually stop right there because he does talk a lot about his career in the civil service. But what he often talks about is how he feels looking back that he sort of busked his way through. But I think that's how many of us feel, particularly in media. Imposter syndrome to some degree. How have we got this far? How have we done this? And we talk a lot about career paths on this podcast, just how unpredictable it can be. There's no staircase really anymore. It doesn't feel linear, much more like a zigzag. And when you're starting out, that can seem daunting because we get pushed into imagining a perfect job, when, of course, as we've already learned, we can do 3 or 4 perfect jobs during our working lives, 2, 3, 4 careers in effect. You never know what direction you might go in. I'm David Spencer, and welcome to episode 11 of the Media Mentor podcast. On this podcast, I aim to help and support you in the job hunt, just like my mentoring sessions have done for clients over the last 20 years. And on this episode, I talk to Emily Slater, who's worked as a broadcast journalist and now works in communications for a charity. We discussed that work and the transition from journalism and whether that move is as easy as many people think it is. And we also look at how the work you do as a communications officer or press officer these days is evolving. Emily, lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to be here.
Now, Emily, we've got a lot to talk about because we want to
Mm.
look at the path really that many consider, many do, from journalism into comms and the connection between the two, something perhaps that's a little bit more common than it used to be. But when you started out, Emily, what did you envisage as your career path?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I certainly didn't think that I'd end up doing what I'm doing now, which is PR and communications manager at a national children's charity. But that's not to say that I'm not happy with where I am now. So, yeah, going back to the beginning, I guess I was just keen to get stuck into a career in journalism. I wanted to be the next Kate Adie, quite frankly. And that probably ages me a little bit to your younger listeners. But no, like lots of young people, I wasn't entirely sure. And I actually, yeah, had a bit of a strange sort of entry into the world of journalism, I guess, because I studied languages at university. I did a degree in French and linguistics just because I quite enjoyed it and I was good at it at school, did A levels. And then it was actually at university I got into student radio. That really piqued my interest in a career in broadcast journalism and the media. So there was that strand, but also actually having done that degree in languages and spending a year living abroad, I really enjoyed meeting people of different cultures, different backgrounds, hearing their stories, traveling. Obviously, that can overlap with journalism to some extent as well. So, yeah, it was all kind of paving a way for me to pursue this career in journalism. But I definitely didn't think I'd end up then working in PR. If I'm honest, when I was probably 20, 21, I probably didn't know too much about what public relations involved.
Well, I think that's such an important point to just underline that either not necessarily knowing about the sector or knowing what it actually meant, but not necessarily thinking that that's the path that you go on. Because I think what we talked about a lot on the podcast is at 20, 21, 22, thinking too much about that path and certainly thinking about the first job being critical to that. So it's interesting the decisions we make and then the journey that we go on because it's such a zigzag. You studied at BJTC, Emily. Why did you decide to do that? That's the, for those that don't know, the broadcast equivalent really of the NCTJ, but a really well
Yeah.
recognized journalism MA degree.
That's right. Yeah, I was thinking back to this time, sort of knowing I was coming on to talk about my career and where it all started. And I think it was just the advice I was given at the time when I started looking into it, what was required if I wanted to work for the BBC or perhaps a commercial broadcaster. This BJTC just kept coming up again and again. And I think part of it is because it is such a competitive industry to break into. It's one of the things that might just set you apart if you've got that professional accreditation sort of behind you. But I was also aware, these things don't come cheap. I was just out of a 4-year university. Bachelor of Arts course. So, I was lucky I had a little bit of savings from like a small inheritance that I received, but I was really aware that, it does then become a little bit sort of exclusive when you say that, you need this very expensive course in order to sort of break in. So I felt very lucky that I was in a position I could do another year of study, which involved me moving down to London. So I was at the London College of Communications. And what really appealed when I started looking into it is that it wasn't really an academic course, which I'd just come out of at the University of Oxford. So this was going to be something completely different. It was very practical, hands-on, operated like a newsroom effectively, the sort of learning
Mm.
environment that I was in. And that really appealed. And also, we just had amazing access to people already working in the industry. So, our course leader, he was really well connected, he had a long career in the BBC himself, and he would invite colleagues, friends that worked in radio and TV in to talk to us. And then we also got to set up work placements. So yeah, it was the perfect introduction to the job, really.
And just on that point about one of the episodes we talked about it being who you know maybe a little bit more than what you know, which we know is an issue in a lot of industries, but media
Mm.
particularly. But that just underlines that when you're on that course, that's what you were doing. You were building some of those contacts. That's one of the benefits of doing that MA. And as you said, not everyone can necessarily afford to do that. I'm interested in these next steps because you worked for BFBS, someone I've worked for as well. People might know it's
Yeah.
the sort of Forces Radio, Forces Network, but you did that in several locations, including Cyprus, around the world, around Europe. What did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, it was a brilliant sort of training ground again, really. First step into the world of professional broadcast journalism work. So yeah, BFBS, the British Forces Broadcasting Service. My first position with them was in Northern Ireland, and I was living in the community. So I guess that what it really taught me was how to dig out a story and the importance, especially in local and regional journalism, of really getting to know your audience. So I was living sort of surrounded by squaddies, officers, soldiers, people in the military, servicemen and women, and just getting out and about, going to events, talking to them was the best way in which I could really find out those stories. I wasn't relying on press releases, ironically, because that's what I do now is write and send out press releases. But it was, yeah, about just really kind of throwing yourself into the community. So I learned that, and I also learned working with servicemen and women, the skills needed to really bring people out of their shell because by their nature, often soldiers and people who kind of work in that line of work can be naturally cautious and a bit lacking in confidence when it comes to speaking out and telling their story because of the nature of the work. It can be quite sensitive. So yeah, those skills were sort of honed in that environment over time. I would say as well with BFBS, what I learned was the importance of being multimedia trained. So I started off as a radio reporter, but over time I was asked to, take photos because they would be needed for social media. And then eventually I picked up a video camera and got trained up on make and being a video journalist effectively. So yeah, that I learned so much. And I mean, the experience of living in different countries as well was obviously fantastic.
And having been a broadcast journalist, having ticked, say, the BBC thing as well, done a bit of that you thought about with your BJTC or part of that journey, you moved into PR and comms. What was the thinking behind that decision?
To be completely honest with you, David, it was circumstantial initially rather than a sort of conscious decision to make the move. So I ended up marrying a soldier.
Hmm.
That those sort of worlds collided, if you like.
You took your job very seriously.
Well, yeah. I mean, I did meet him first and then get the job, but yeah, we won't go into that. But yeah, it just took me all over the place. Obviously, the job, and then being with somebody who serves their country, you have to kind of follow them effectively. You are a military spouse, so they get posted and off you go. So Northern Ireland to Cyprus and then to Germany. And I was able to work for BFBS at all of those places, for which I was really grateful. We came back to the UK and I started a career with the BBC, which was fantastic. And I felt like it really sort of went up a notch in terms of the type of stories that I was covering and the fast-paced environment of the BBC newsroom. But then we moved again, and that is the downside in many ways of being a military spouse. So we ended up down in Hampshire, and I started looking around for work. The BBC down there weren't recruiting at that time. So that's when I first thought, what else can I do? Where can my skills transfer to? And I saw a job advertised, and it was a 6-month contract with a wildlife charity and visitor attraction. It was a zoo that also raised money for wildlife causes. So I applied and I got the job to work on a particular project as the PR assistant. And as they say, I never looked back. I went over to what they called the dark side in the world of journalism. It wasn't really dark. It was, cute and fluffy animals and working for a great cause. But as I say, circumstantial rather than a sort of real desire. But it ended up being the right decision for me, I think.
Something that reminds me of my childhood when I looked at your career, because Marwell Zoo is
Yeah.
somewhere that I visited, and I think lots of people would have done in southern England as part of school trips. I am sure of people of a certain
Yeah,
age would
not a bad
certainly know that.
place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
really beautiful location to work as well, I must say.
And you said about the dark side. I mean, we joke, but that is what people say, particularly journalists who stay journalists can be a
Mm.
bit dismissive of that. But what I'm interested in and what we want to look at is the skills that do transfer, but also when you started doing that, and you say it's circumstance, but then you think, actually, I enjoy this, and you did have some skills, but I presume you learnt stuff as well, and you've had to develop skills since. So what did you have already, and what have you had to develop?
Yeah, that's such a good question because I think most journalists probably think they know pretty well what being a PR or working in public relations is all about. But actually, until you're in it, you probably don't really know the full story.
Mm.
So, I mean, the media relations side is the obvious one. Clearly, those skills are highly transferable because you're used to talking to journalists, working with them, being one yourself. So you kind of know what makes them tick, how to pique their interest, and you've already got those great contacts. So that's a real benefit. But I would say there's a lot more to PR than just that. It's about shaping a narrative, having a strategy, stakeholder management, and influencing. I mean, on the strategy point, what I found in PR that was different to my previous work in journalism is you're always kind of looking at the long term, whereas a newsroom can be quite throwaway. Especially when you're working on daily news like I did at BBC Radio Gloucestershire as a producer, reporter, and a newsreader. So it's like you focus on the day's news, and literally at the end of the day, the scripts go in the bin and off you go. And then the next day, you're working on something else. Whereas when you're in a PR team for an organization, yeah, you're looking at that longer term strategy. So what's coming up in the next quarter, next year, and those plans kind of take weeks and months to develop. So it's a different type of focus, which really struck me as something that differed. But I think one thing that really helped in terms of those transferable skills was an understanding of the audience. So journalists are great, obviously, at getting a story angle, but also really focusing on that audience of one, which I'm sure you've heard so many times. I'm sure you
Yes.
tell your students, David, it's in radio, you've got an audience of one. So you're not focused on, it doesn't muddy the waters. You're just thinking about that one person, who they are, what they like, what they're into, and that's your audience. And I think if you bring that into PR, it's a real advantage.
Well, that's great because that's one of the things I've said to clients making the move and looking to make the move that is a real undervalued skill from what we do in particularly radio, but podcast or journalism, which is that audience thing. We've said the dark side reference that people often cite about PR. Also, I guess saying about that daily news environment, which can be dynamic, it can be fast paced, it can be very exciting and exhilarating. And people often say that's not the case for PR and comms. Do you think that it's fair to sort of dismiss it as less sort of dynamic?
I think it definitely is still dynamic, but the pace is different and it comes more in peaks and troughs, maybe when you work in PR for an organization. So you're working towards those big campaigns, those big launches, those media events, celebrity moments. So it's a bit more kind of, like I say, peaks and troughs, ups and downs, rather than the daily kind of roller coaster, if you like,
Hmm.
of a fast-paced newsroom. But you still get that variety. And often in PR, you're juggling multiple projects and priorities at the same time. And I would say increasingly, PR and comms roles are getting sort of bigger and encompassing more. Just the kind of climate we're in, cutbacks, budget restraints. Often you find that a PR and comms person, I'm including myself, is responsible for multiple areas. So we're talking internal and external comms, obviously the media relations, but also public affairs, the celebrity and influencer piece, social media, digital. So it's really sort of wide ranging and therefore, yeah, kind of busy and interesting and dynamic as well. But yeah, they can't be compared in terms of the pace, I don't think, but there's a lot of similarities.
And also a lot of multimedia content being produced by
Mm,
comms teams these days as well, which can be very satisfying. It
absolutely.
sounds like you actually really do love what you do, Emily, which is fantastic.
I do, yeah. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work for some fantastic causes. I'm into my third sort of charity PR role. We continued moving around a lot with my husband's career, but I'm glad to say, settled in one place now. He's finished his military career, so it's nice to have that feeling of being settled and able to have a bit of longevity in a role. So I've worked for brain tumor research as well as the PR manager, which was hugely rewarding. And now Ronald McDonald House Charities UK, which is actually part of a bigger global charity, RMHC, which is based in the US. So again, there's a lot of excitement and interest that comes from working for an international charity. And I've had opportunities to travel overseas and connect with colleagues from all over the world. So that's been massively rewarding. But I think, yeah, you can hear it in my voice. It's the sort of motivation you get from working for a great cause. It's the cliche, but it's, gets you out of bed in the morning and wanting to contribute to something good ultimately.
Well, I think that's fantastic. And here's the question I've asked a couple of people who've got more experience because I'm fascinated in this and I bang the drum about, again, thinking like we said at the start of this interview, at the start of your career, you might have an idea of what you want to do and you think it might be very linear, but it's such a zigzag that many of us go on, particularly in media. Looking back, I know you probably couldn't have plotted this path, which is what you said, but what would you say to the young, 22-year-old Emily all these years later as a bit of advice that you've learned on the journey?
Oh yes, yeah, it's funny, isn't it, to think, yeah, you wouldn't have predicted this path, but that's what makes life interesting, right? I think back then, the social media was only just sort of emerging, so that really ages me and dates me, but the rate of change in that area has just been exponential, hasn't it? So I would probably have warned 22-year-old Emily that, keep your keep your eye on the ball because the digital age is really about to explode and just yeah, the pace of that has been incredible over the past couple of decades. Again, if you think about AI as such a hot sort of topic in my workplace now as it is in workplaces all over the world, no doubt back then it was the stuff of like sci-fi movies.
Mm.
So I think just yes, a knowledge of how quickly things were going to change over the next few years, and kind of connected to that, I would advise the 22-year-old me, but also any 22-year-old now to just stay curious and keep learning because I think at that age you might have a tendency to think, right, I've done my degree, I might have done a postgraduate diploma or an MA. I'm ready now. I've learned everything. I'm good to go. But actually, learning and development never stops, and I'm still doing it, and I hope to still be doing it in 10, 20 years' time, maybe. So, yeah, just keep learning, keep your ears and eyes open, talk to colleagues who are more experienced, get yourself on courses and read up in your area as much as you can because yeah, it keeps you fresh and keeps you kind of up to date and on the ball.
Well, I think that's such a really good message to underline is the keep learning, not just because of tech, as you say, but just I think that's a good life thing to be curious and to always be interested. Emily, it's fascinating. That's really interesting to hear about that move and just also to hear your enthusiasm. Someone I've known for quite a long time and sort of keep an eye on in the industry. Our paths have crossed on a couple of occasions. It's just great to hear that you're loving it so much. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much. Great to catch up with you.
What Emily says about continuing to learn is one of my favorite mantras. Obviously, we never know it all, but I have met many people that think they do. Being open to learn is a terrific strength. Also, moving from journalism into PR for Emily was a choice of circumstance, as she said, But what we didn't touch on was how hard it was as a mother for Emily to find work in a newsroom that was flexible and open to her needs as a parent. Moving into comms offered her that flexibility. It's something I want to explore on a future episode in a lot more detail, because we lose too many great talents from journalism because companies don't offer parents, but particularly mothers, flexibility and support. That's it for this latest episode of the Media Mentor podcast. If you'd like to find out more about my mentoring, then get in touch via themediamentor.info. You might want your CV reviewed, and I offer a service where I'll review that over 10 minutes in audio and send that file back to you. One-to-one sessions are also available and held online and totally confidential. For the latest media jobs, visit my website, and you can follow the WhatsApp channel to see the jobs I find as I find them. Thanks again to Emily for a terrific interview, and thanks too to Mrs. Mentor for managing the website, and also sound designer and music composition genius Josh Sommer, who wrote this music for me. Thank you for listening, and remember to click follow on your favourite podcast player to keep up to date with the latest episodes, and please write a review if you've enjoyed listening.